We're continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Siman Resh Mem Gimel, beginning of Hilchot Shabbat, and we did basically the Maran and Ramah. We are up to the Mishnah Berura and Sif Katan Tet, discussing the Ramah of Gimel Amud Bet of the regular prince of Mishnah Berura. So the Ramah commented on Shulchan Aruch, even though that the field or the business that the goy is running for the Jew or for the partnership is not a 50-50 partnership, he just has it and he takes basically a percentage of 25%, 33% of the gross benefits of this business, still would be fine. Even though that the Jew, the more the goy works, and the fact that he's not working 6 days but 7 days is going to be benefiting the percentage of the the 67% or the 75% that the Jew has is going to be increased, clearly even more increased than the goy himself gets, but still will be mutar. Why? Because once the goy has a percentage and the more he works, the more he gets, he is doing the job for his selfish benefits because he gets more and therefore he's pushing his limits to get paid more. We call that in halacha, adata de nafshe ka'avid. He is working for himself, and that would make it mutar. Now, this, of course, is talking about the case of Sadeh and Rechaim, which is mutar. Maran wrote that those two cases will be mutar, and the Ramah over here is adding that not only the schirut in that case would be mutar, but even as arisut would be mutar. Arisut is this setup that he takes care of the whole thing A to Z, and he takes percentage. And Maran also holds like that. It's not that Maran says schirut la'afuke to exclude this case of getting percentage. Maran does not disagree with it at all. He just says one out of the two cases, and the Ramah is adding what is obvious. Now, the Chafetz Chaim in Sif Katan Yud of the Mishnah Berura writes, "V'davka bazeh shenoten leno Yehudi helek b'tevuah." Only in a case that you are actually giving a percentage of the produce to the aris, to the person that's working for you. Aval im sachar ha'enu Yehudi la'avod bo kol hashana v'shito la'Yehudi kol ha'tevuah ma'asateh. If you are hiring the goy for an entire year's work, and you are taking everything of the produce, you're paying him a set amount. After Medina bazegam ken sharet deno Yehudi adata nafshe avid, even though that this also would be mutar because the guy wants the produce to be good, he wants to have a good track record, and he's been put in charge of the sadeh for the whole year. You take care of my field, and you get paid X amount of dollars. He doesn't have to necessarily work on Shabbat. It's not getting paid by the day. He's getting paid by the year. He works a year, he gets $50,000, and based on the work that he does during the entire course of the year, he's getting that payment, not based on specific days. So therefore, Shabbat is not something that you're asking him to work necessarily. And technically speaking, this setup also should be completely mutar. There's no reason that this should be asur, right? And yet, after Medina bazegam ken share, the af im lo yezabel ve'harosh ve'ksor hasadeh b'Shabbat yachol la'asot b'chol. He could do everything he does on Shabbat on weekdays as well. And the reason he does it on Shabbat is because he wants to do it faster and earlier for himself, for his own benefit. Mikol makom asur. At the end of the day, despite all of these, that technically speaking he should be allowed, still is going to be asur. Why? Because if he's not an aris, people who see him work on Shabbat, they think that he was hired as a day's pay worker, and therefore that marit ayin is going to make it problematic. Now, when they see at the end of the season he's not getting any chelek, and when they see that at the end of the season the Jew takes everything home to his silos, and the goy walks away with just money, so they think that he was paid based on the days of work, because in people's minds it is either you're an aris or you're a worker. Now, the fact that you created such third category of a worker for a year's worth, which gets around the problem, it's irrelevant, because people don't think like that, because that's not the norm, and therefore you end up with no technical problems, but with a chashad. So the three things that we said in the onset of the sugya, that there are three elements, you got around all the other ones, but you're stuck with the chashad problem, and therefore it still would lie asur, would stay halachically not allowed. Now says the Mishnah Berura, this is of course something that we're going to discuss at the beginning of the next Siman, but he writes, Vedad, V'merchas k'hai gavna, in the case of the public bathhouse, in this type of setting, that the goy is renting it for an entire year's worth, and the Yehudi gets all of the revach of the Shabbatot as well, then Medina is asur. Then that's asur, even halachically speaking. It's not just because of marit ayin that's asur, but that's asur Medina. Why? והוא הדין ברחיים באופן זה. דהד השערין על מתחילה מדינה, היינו דווקא בשדה. This that me'ikar hadin, technically it would be mutar, is only in a field, because the job that you do is a set job. You have to water the plants twice a week, whatever it is. You have to prune. You have to do certain jobs that you could do either on Shabbat or on weekdays. So you don't have to work on Shabbat. But in the case of Rechaim and Merchas, you have to do it on Shabbat, because every day it's his own pay. Every penny that you make, it's his own money. It's not that you could have made the money of Shabbat on Friday or on Sunday. So therefore, every day is a new revach, a new revenue for the Jew. That would become a isur meikar adin, because the job that you're doing is for the Jew, and you're just a schir yom. You're just a paid worker for the Jew. Even though that he is getting schar from the Jew for the year's worth, we don't say that he's doing the work of Shabbat for himself, because the Jew is actually benefiting separately from the Shabbat's work, where he could not have had that hana'ah if the guy did not work on Shabbat. Masha'enken, in contrast with the case of Sadeh, which would be actually very easily done outside Shabbat. The Jew would have zero extra or less benefit if the guy would not work on Shabbat and do all those pruning and watering on Friday or on Sunday. So therefore, Ikar Adin, there's no problem. There's only an issue of Marit Ayin. Mashenken here, every penny that you make on Shabbat could not have been made on Friday or on Sunday. Hence, the Jew is directly benefiting from Shabbat's work, and that would be a problem. Now, getting into Siman Reshmem Dalet, it's going to be a little bit more complicated. This is what, in parentheses, he discusses here. We'll leave that for Siman Reshmem Dalet. But the Kevan, the Medina Asur, afilu nitparsem scharo l'shana. So even though that you went and put flyers in all the Hamodia and Jewish magazines that this merchas is not a daily or weekly rental, it's a year rental, still would be asur, because the Jew at the end of the day is getting schar Shabbat. V'gam hu chutz l'tchum, even if it's outside the tchum, and everyone knows about the setup of the goy, that only takes being chutz l'tchum or being mefursam, that this is a year's rental. The only thing that does is takes care of Marit Ayin. That's what it does. We're not talking about Marit Ayin over here. Marit Ayin also could be an additional problem. But the issue here is Me'ikaradin. The issue is that the Jew is actually getting schar Shabbat, money that was made on Shabbat for the Jew, which would not have been there if they didn't work on Shabbat. So that's the problem. So therefore, we don't say that the goy is working adat nafsheh, and it will still be asur. Fine. So on that, if you take a look at the Sefer Halichot Shabbat, he brings on this last piece of Mishnah Berura that even if if you rent it, so certainly if you sell it to the goy, the Mishnah Berura says it will be mutar. The last piece of this long Mishnah Berura over here says, "V'chol sheken shemutar hecha shemecharo lo legamri b'chol erev Shabbat." If you sell erev Shabbat, you sell the business to the goy, then that will be mutar, because you're not having any hana from it. Then it's mamash adata denafsheh. So that is only when there's no chashash of marit ayin. So even if you sell the business to a goy on Shabbat, you still have to deal with marit ayin. That people have to know that it's not your business that's operating on Shabbat, because when you're selling it only for Shabbat, people may not know that this is the goy's, because the rest of the week they see the Jew working there. So when they see it on Shabbat open and the Jew is not there, a goy is there, people are going to think that this is a worker of the Jew. So whenever you have this like Shabbat sales, I just had somebody that has discount store chains, and he wanted to make like a shtar mechira for his workers. I don't usually do this myself, because I believe that in order for them to actually be able to sell, they can't have the janitor of the store and sell it to him, because that's harama. I only would be comfortable with it if one of the partners actually is a Gentile, which could be sold to the business, could be sold to him on Shabbat. So that eliminates many of these stores that they end up selling it to some, janitor or someone that's very unsophisticated, and it's really not realistic that you're selling, hundreds of thousands of dollars to a regular person that is getting $15 an hour, $10 an hour to work. So that's one of the reasons. But again, the other issue that you have to handle also is if a person has a BP or a gas station or a discount store in a Jewish neighborhood, and everyone knows this is the 99-cent store of Reuben, this is the gas station of Shimon, and then all of a sudden is working on Shabbat, then you have to also be mindful that's not just the technical Hilchot Shabbat that you have to get around, but you also have to get around the issue of Marit Ayin. Fine. Seif Bet says, Maran, Afilu Merchas o Tanur, Im Hiskiram, we mentioned that Merchas and Tanur is a problem, is a bigger problem than Sadeh and Rechaim, but even Merchas and Tanur, Im Hiskiram Shana Achar Shana, it's been year after year that you have been renting it out to people. Everybody in town knows that Reuben owns this merchatz. Yes, he owns this tanur, but he does not rent it out based on days. It's not that he's hiring workers to work for him, but he is actually renting it out to a goy, and the goy is the momentary owner, so to speak, of this merchatz or this tanur. Then it becomes mutar. Or another case, even if it's a fresh business that Reuben bought, but it's the minhag of that town that people buy a public bathhouse and they rent it out, they outsource to different companies that they run the merchatz and they pay a yearly fee. That also will be mutar, even if it's immediate. So if Reuben buys this, and now it's on all the newspapers that Reuben just bought this chain of public bathhouses, so everyone knows that this brand, so to speak, this name is a Jewish name, and is operating on Shabbat, still will be mutar. Why? Because in this town, everyone does this. The minhag is, if you own the merchatz, has nothing to do with operation. You rent it out. So you may have the branding, you may have the name, but there is a subcontractor that deals with the entire thing. It's not a daily paid business, but rather a contracting job, and that will be mutar. Fine. Afilu b'makom ha'asur, says the Rama, im ena merchatz tanur shel Yisrael, rak scharam me'enu Yehudi. If you are renting from a goy, you're not the sole owner of this business, but you're renting from Enu Yehudi, and then you go back and you rent it out for Shabbat to a goy, that is mutar. The En Shema Yisrael Nikra, because the name of the Yid is not called upon this business. This is owned by a goy. You are renting from him, but you're not renting for Shabbat. You're renting it back to a goy, to the same goy, a different goy. For Shabbat, that is also fine. Why? Because of two things. Because first of all, technically speaking, you have no problem because you rented it out. And Marit Ayin wise, you have no problem because it's not called after your name. You're a subcontractor, so to speak. It's called, the merchas was always called in the time of Chazal after the owner. So therefore, this that's owned by a goy will be fine. Also, if you have a private bathhouse, which is in a residential building, in a dira, and only the residents of that building are the users of this merchatz, those are the only people who are allowed to use it, and they know what the truth is. They know that this is not a goy that's working for the Jew. It's not a poel, but rather it is that the goy has rented it for a year, and it's not a worker for the Jew, but rather a renter that owns, basically, for all practical purposes, the place for the year, then it's mutar. But if you did rent it out in a place that you were not supposed to, because of Marit Ayin, Yesh omrim shesecharo mutar, that those who say afal piken, still the money you're allowed to benefit from. Yesh omrim shasur, and there are those who say no, it's asur, you can't benefit from the money. V'chen ikar, the Rama says you should be machmir. So says the Mishna Berura over here. So first of all, when the Shulchan Aruch says that you have done this year after year, and now it's nit parsem, people know about it, that this is not for the Jew, what is exactly the level of year after year, right? So many poskim write that 3 years is the cutoff thing. It's been 3 years. Every year you have made a condition that would be really the level of pirsum that you would need. There are others who write that if you have in the first 3 years of the operation of this merchatz, you have made a condition with the goy not to use it on Shabbat and Yom Tov, and then after 3 years, that it's now mutar, he could start now working on Shabbat. In other words, the first 3 years you would necessitate that you make a deal with him that I'm going to rent you the merchatz, but for the first 3 years until it hits that bare minimum of yedi'ah for the community, first 3 years you cannot work on Shabbat, you cannot work on Yom Tov. So even though that ends up with an ironic situation, that now that people know, now I can start working on Shabbat. It's like the first 3 years you have to be more frum. The goy stops it, and until people get to know that this is not really Reuben's operation. It is, he's the owner, but he has given it to this X, Y, and Z company. And once people get to know that, after 3 years, then the companies could start now working and be operational on Shabbat and Yom Tov as well, because people by then know that this is not Reuben operating it with Poalim, but rather he's the owner, he's rented it for the year, and they do whatever they want, and it's the goy doing it for himself. Fine. So says the Chafetz Chaim, ואף אין דרך אותו המקום ואותו האיש רק להזכיר, מכל מקום מותר גם בהריסות ליתלו להזכירו לו. Even if the place is not accustomed to do in a mutardik way, as the Shulchan says later on, but if it's been already 3 years, enough time, it's mutar because people are already going to assume the right things. Yud Bet, says the Rama, says the Mishna Berura rather, on the words of the Rama, the beginning, va'afilu makom ha'asur, if the merchas or the tanur is belonging to the Jew and he's renting it out, it doesn't belong to the Jew rather, sorry, but he's renting it out from the goy, then it's mutar for him to go and rent it out again on Shabbat to a goy. Rak secharam bebet Yosef hevi b'shem teshuvat hageonim duadin im kana meno Yehudi. If you buy it from a non-Jew, not just renting it, but you bought the merchas from an eno Yehudi, v'techem kodem sheyashav ba hiskiram, and from the very get-go, you rent it out for the Shabbatot. Delo nikra shemo alav. This way, your name has not been called on it yet. V'yesh lismoch al zeh, says the Mishna Berura, you could rely on this kula that the Beit Yosef brings. The Sefer Mate Yehuda of Rabbi Yehuda Ayash, it was the Rav and Abedin of Algeria. He also writes over here in this Siman, in Sif Katan Vav, that even if you built it yourself, still it's going to be mutar, so long as you didn't operate it yet, before the goy comes in. So that's going to be a bigger chiddush even. The Kaf HaChaim brings this, Rabbi Yehuda Ayash as well, that as long as your name has not been called on it, still will be mutar. One more piece over here, and then we'll stop. Chazar v'izkiram, yesh omrim, the bischirut nami eno mutar ela kshlo yashav ba Yisrael, כמו שכתב בית יוסף בקנה, אבל הרי רבה ושארי האחרונים כתבו, דבשכרו ממנו יהודי, אף שישב בה ישראל, מותר להזכירה לאינו יהודי, דלא נקרא שמו עליו. It's a discussion of when your name is called upon the business, which would create the problem. So there's machloket. There are those who say that when you rent, even though that you're not the owner, it's got to be only mutar when you have not moved in and started operating the business. Like the Yosef rather writes in the case of purchasing, but the Eliyahu Rabbah and many other achronim disagree with this. They say if you rent from a goy, even though that you already have sat there and started the operations, still will be considered mutar because it's not called after your name. It's called after the name of the owner, not the renter. That's how it was in the time of Chazal and in time Mishna Berura even, when you owned a public bathhouse, it was called after your name. The renter was irrelevant almost. So that machloket would actually lead to a heter, that if you are a renter, you would have it easier that, once you're not the sole owner, you could actually rent it out on Shabbat, and that would be still fine. There are some details of this that are very geschmack, and the application of it nowadays in our day and age with the businesses that we have, Be'ezrat Hashem, will continue in the next year. Chazaku Baruch.